My name is Michael Pewtress. I ran for MP in Calgary Centre this last 2019 election, with the platform of educating constituents on government finance and family law reform. If you understand how government administrates commercially, you can navigate between what is necessary and what is a policy designed to steal the public wealth, such as what seem like arbitrary tax increases or policy designed to appropriate securities from the public. I have included a link to this video. Download it and share it. There is no opinion in here, just definitions, facts, and examples. All the public needs is one MP or one MLA to stand up and work with me for the public benefit. Send this video to your MLA or MP and maybe we can find one that isn't compromised. I'm condensing years of personal education into this video. First, I'm going to give you definitions. You can pause the video to read them. Otherwise, if I read them out loud, this video is going to be far too long. However, please learn these definitions. If you understand them and how they are applied in government, you'll have a basic understanding on government finance. Think of this as a crash course, and the process is the same for every country in the world, as far as I know, but the acts I'm using are Canadian. You can interchange your country's acts with the acts that I'm naming. Simply understanding these definitions will help you see the accounting of government. Accounting or financial balance is the entire purpose of governance. There are two types of tax credits. There are refundable and non-refundable tax credits. A refundable credit means you can get the full credit back no matter the amount owed. So let's say you owe $800 to the CRA, but you have 1,000 refundable tax credits. The refundable tax credit will balance the debt to zero, and the remaining $200 will be sent to you from the CRA as $200. The GST check you receive is a refundable tax credit. Non-refundable credits are limited. They only have the ability to balance liabilities. So if you have an $800 debt obligation but 1,000 non-refundable tax credits, the debt obligation is balanced for you, but you will not receive the remaining amount in $200. Most credits that the government offer are non-refundable tax credits. So let's look at appropriation, the creation of tax credits and how it's applied in government. Let's say you've been pulled over by the police for speeding. Curse that speed trap! So the police officer writes a court summons saying you sped, with the fine being $100. The officer also writes the law that applies to the summons. It would read, did unlawfully contravene Section 115 of the Traffic and Safety Act. Now, that ticket is just a summons. The summons must go through the court, whether you go to court or not. So, in this example, you show up to court and the judge finds you guilty. Now, the judgment has been made and the summons becomes an expenditure because, by definition, it is a debt made by public policy or law. You go to pay for the ticket in front of the clerk, and you're an old school individual, so you pay with a check. You don't write the check to the judge because that's a conflict of interest. You pay the finance minister, who is fiduciary for the Financial Administration Act and the General Revenue Fund. There is a provincial General Revenue Fund and a federal Consolidated Revenue Fund. When your check is filed, the expenditure is filed with it, and the expenditure appropriates $100 tax credits, effectively fundraising 200 securities. So go over the definitions again if you need to, because this can be a little confusing. An expenditure is used to appropriate from consideration within the government. The job of our ministers and members of parliament are to make sure Canadian laws are funded. This is done through the yearly federal budget. All acts are funded by appropriation through the budget. If an act isn't listed in the budget, it's not being funded by appropriating funds, and it cannot function. In March of 2020, the Prime Minister announced a nationwide pandemic. This pandemic, which shut down the country, should constitute an emergency. Canada has an Emergencies Act, and this act has the power to create expenditures for any public benefit required. It can pay for tents, doctors, masks, emergency transport, nurses, food production, short-term pandemic-related jobs, any benefit required. The Federal Consolidated Revenue Fund is the country's consideration used to accept any and all expenditures that the Emergency Act creates. They will appropriate the new tax credits to fund the emergency. Instead, the Prime Minister shut down Parliament for the first time in Canadian history, and in 2 weeks implemented a payment plan to send funds direct from the Consolidation Revenue Fund, and named the bill Bill C-13-431. All funds should be appropriated from the acts themselves. No cash should be spent from the Consolidated Revenue Fund, because if the Consolidated Revenue Fund gets depleted, Canada loses all powers of negotiation and security creation for the public benefit. Bill C-13-431 states in the summary, payments from the Consolidated Revenue Fund, not appropriations from the Consolidated Revenue Fund. For example, Part 3 enacts the Public Health Events of National Concern Payments Act, which authorizes payments to be made out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund in relation to the public health events of national concern. Or Part 5 amends the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation Act to authorize the Minister of Finance, with the approval of the Governor in Council, to make payments to the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund for the purpose of increasing the corporation's capital. Just read the summary of the Act. There is zero appropriation happening. In fact, the only time it's mentioned in the Act is under the Mortgage and Housing Act, Section 16, Number 2B. It states, any additional amounts that may be authorized from time to time under an appropriation act. And that is only written because the $10 billion removed from the Consolidated Revenue Fund gets exhausted. More securities can then be created. I have a good idea where that money is going, but that's speculation, and at this point I'm only here to inform you of what's actually happening. This is what's most concerning. Once the Consolidated Revenue Fund gets depleted, Canada will not have the capacity to fund itself and create tax credits to fund the government. Canada would require assistance from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, or another entity with the financial capacity to cover or appropriate our needed funds. Now, if you think the Conservatives are any better, you are sadly mistaken. The Liberal and Conservative parties are distracting all of us with this petty wee scandal. Yes, Trudeau should be removed for those actions, but if you believe the wee scandal is the biggest emergency in Canada, taking all of the MPs and ministers' time, you're sadly misinformed. It is entirely easy to remove Trudeau just from his antics in the last 2 years. It's not hard. The real scandal is how not one elected member that I'm aware of is talking or doing anything about the depletion of the Consolidated Revenue Fund. All we need is one MP or one MLA to stand up and work with me for the public benefit, and maybe we can find one that isn't compromised so we can turn things around. I'm Michael Pewtress. I ran for MP in Calgary Centre this last 2019 election. All I want is what's best for this country and what's best for you. I'm not trying to say I know exactly what's best for you, but I do know that if we deplete our funds, we're not going to be able to operate. And that is a very, very scary and serious matter. So if you found this information helpful, please send it off to your MLA or your MP. If we find one that is willing to work with me and us, then we'll be able to really make a difference. Thank you for your time.